Trial of the Ancestors adds a new way to customize your character, passive skill tree tattoos. And today I wanted to go over all of them, talking about some of the most powerful, least powerful, best options, worst options, and what's most economical. So, first up, I'm going to go over all the tattoos and kind of rate them. I know recently Grimo did a video, and I'll try to remember to link it down below so that you can get a second opinion. Be sure to watch his after this one for full context. Alright, so without further ado, let's get into it, starting with the honored tattoos that change notables. These will modify a 30 strength, dex, or intelligence notable on your skill tree. And it's important to note that you don't have access to whatever your class's primary stat is if you're a witch, marauder, or ranger. And it can still be somewhat difficult as Templar, duelist, and shadow. Which means if you're a ranger and you need a 30 dex tattoo, that's going to be pretty difficult. You'll have to go all the way down and all the way up to try to find something that is cross-classed at the border between, say, shadow and witch, or if a border between duelist and marauder. With that out of the way, let's get into them. First, Honored Tattoo of a Barbarian. +1 to maximum cold resistance, +1 to maximum frenzy charges, replacing dexterity. This is relatively easy to access on the left side of a tree, relatively difficult on the right side, and +1 maximum frenzy charges is very powerful, so it's probably worth going out of your way for, especially because as a frenzy charge stacking build, you'll probably be going to a socket down near the duelist anyway. We've also got Honored Tattoo of a Berserker. My guess is this one will be pretty pricey, because it replaces a dexterity notable with Onslaught on hit. Onslaught is attack, cast, and move speed, which is very powerful. So this is going to be quite good. However, again, it can be a little bit difficult to use for certain builds. Now, luckily there are some alternatives. As a Pathfinder, for example, you could use a Silver Flask, which should have pretty close to 100% uptime. Or you can go with a synthesized Implicit, which also gives Onslaught on hit. These aren't without their own individual opportunity costs, but may be better than trekking halfway across the tree. Whereas if you're on a witch and you have easy access to a dexterity notable, yeah, if you can afford it, absolutely use it. I'd actually say that this one for Onslaught is one of the most powerful because it not only increases your damage or defenses, but also your clear speed. Then we've got Honored Tattoo of a Flood, Arcane Surge on hit with spells. That's going to be pretty niche, and unfortunately most of the builds that would want this are only in the intelligence area of the tree, making it very difficult to use. In the past, Arcane Surge was more spell damage, which is pretty universal for spellcaster builds. And I could still maybe see this on something like a Slave Driver's Hands Trapper that does want cast speed, but for the most part, if you're Arcane Surge, you're already getting it, you're using the support, and I don't think this has much of a place. Then Honored Tattoo of a Hunter, +1 to level of our dexterity skill gems. This is really good if you're using something like Toxic Rain or Explosive Arrow. Interestingly enough, Explosive Arrow Elementalist is very well positioned to use this, whereas a Toxic Rain Raider wouldn't be for reasons that I discussed near the start of the video. There's also a fair few melee skills, such as Cyclone, which are dexterity gems, and therefore might benefit from this, assuming that you want to get their levels up. Levels can be things like increased stages or radius on Cyclone, or in the case of skills of flat damage, somewhat beneficial, though not necessarily the most important thing, so it's likely not worth the expense unless you've truly min-maxed everything else. Then we've got Honored Tattoo of a Mountain, which is fire res and endurance charges on a strength node. The problem with this one is really where it is on the tree. A lot of the builds that want to stack fire res are located bottom left Marauder area, which is right where you can't get a strength notable. Though if you have the travel, say you're a Marauder that comes all the way up to the top because you're a Righteous Fire build, and you happen to loop down to pick up Elemental Overload, well, you're in luck. All of a sudden, a Righteous Fire build is perfectly able to get this, which makes it pretty darn useful. And +1 max endurance charge on our RF Jug? Hell yeah, sign me up. Honored Tattoo of the Paw, melee hits fortify. This makes melee hits fortify way more accessible. There were already nodes in the Marauder Duelist area, but as you went up towards, say, the Templar or even across to the Shadow, classes that were surprisingly effective at melee builds, remember Shield Crush Trickster or Spectral Shield Throw Trickster, though Spectral Shield Throw, I guess, isn't really melee, it just scales off of attacks. Shield Crush is, and would be able to use this. Meanwhile, you've got Templars using all sorts of weird lightning bonks. That would work as well. And for an Ascendant, it's pretty easy to get this. Being able to fortify without giving up fortification effect is pretty insane, so I'm going to rate this as one of the strongest here. Probably up there with the Onslaught. Definitely better than a lot of the generic things like Arcane Surge with spells. Honored Tattoo of a Storm on Intelligence, +1 max light res. While this certainly isn't useless, maximum lightning resistance is not nearly as valuable as colder fire. You don't have an Aegis Aurora equivalent. You don't have things like the Chieftain Ascendancy. There's just less synergy there. So I'm going to say this is a little bit worse. Still not too bad if you want to get your resistances up. And after all, you could always do some sort of, take a 30 dex, 30 int node side by side. You happen to need the dex for your gear, and you're taking the int just to grab an honored tattoo of the storm. That said, there's a second part to it, and that is power charges. Power charges are really strong, and power charge stackers are very popular. Now, power charges are putting this up there with frenzies, probably even above the Fire Res Endurance charge one in terms of total value across all builds. However, most power charge stackers are at the top of a tree, which is the only place where you can't access an intelligence notable. So if you're flexing left to the Templar area or right to the Shadow area, you might want to come down a little farther and end up picking up a 30 intelligence node. That way you're able to activate this, but there is a significant opportunity cost, like I think there is with almost all of the charge stackers. I say almost all because the maximum endurance charge one, there's some interesting things you can do on Slayer specifically where there might be minimal to no actual investment cost because you're pathing right past a 30 strength node. And that's pretty darn cool. Then we've got Honored Tattoo of the Warlord and Honored Tattoo of the Wise. These are both, again, strength and intelligence gems, but because of their cross positioning, it's sort of tricky. Now these days, there's a surprising number of builds that use intelligence gems on non-intelligence classes. A great example of this is my Poison Spark Pathfinder. Spark is an intelligence gem and it's really easy to pick up. So I think a lot of people are going to get use out of Honored Tattoo of the Wise, whereas strength is a little rare. I wouldn't say nobody does it. There's quite a few builds that do actually use strength gems. Something that comes to mind here is Corrupting Fever with Reap. From what I remember of a tree, you can actually pick up a strength node due to kind of pathing up and around and snaking through this and that to try to get everything, mostly going through the Scion Life Wheel. It's still a little bit of a trip and a little bit of an investment. So let's just go over all of these, starting with the charge stackers. The most powerful is definitely going to be Honored Tattoo of a Storm for charge bonuses, and Honored Tattoo of a Mountain for easy accessibility and fire res. Because it's paired, well, that's icing on the cake. You get +1 endurance charge, RF Jug's looking very happy. For the plus skill gems, I'd say Intelligence is the easiest to use, and Warlord is the most difficult to use. Then for special effects, that's a little bit harder because Onslaught's really good, but I'm going to give it to Honor Tattoo of the Pa for melee hits Fortify. Next up, we have Tattoos of the Makanga. These offer incredibly powerful bonuses, but they replace a small dexterity, strength, or intelligence passive, and you have to allocate 7 adjacent passives. There's very few places to actually do this, and most of those places are limited by class. So you can replace a dexterity passive in the dexterity area of a tree around Ranger. You can replace a strength passive in the strength area around Marauder, but it's going to be really hard to find one, say if you're trying to replace dexterity and you're a Templar. So just keep that in mind, and there's one for each tribe. Starting with Arahangui, +1% to maximum cold res. Very powerful defensively, but it's a significant investment because remember you need to allocate 7 points, and it's pretty likely that some of those will not be useful to your build. Though, if you can min-max and get a good number of those, let's just say 4 of the 7 are useful, then I'd say it's probably worth picking up. Also, Hinekora, increased effect of your curses. If you're using 2 curses, this is good. If you're using 3 curses, this is great. And luckily, a lot of builds that use 3 curses are on Occultist, which is in the perfect place to use this. So that's actually a really good one. We've got Kitava, which is 80% increased maximum total life recovery per second from Leech. Basically, this is Volpact without the downside of Volpact. It's not quite as good because it doesn't multiply your other increases. It's insanely powerful though. And a lot of strength builds do Leech, especially now with Instant Leech. So this is a pretty good one, and I can absolutely recommend picking it up. Namahu, on the other hand, +1 max fire res. Well, if you're an RF Jug, that's looking pretty good, and they're both easy to use. So far, the only one that's been quite difficult to use is the Arahangui one, because a lot of the builds that want max cold res are using things like Aegis Aurora and tend to be located towards the top and left of a tree, rather than the bottom right. A lot of the bottom right builds, if they go with a special unique shield, we'll go with the Ultimatum Shield instead, and don't worry about resistances nearly as much. Then we've got Ramako, which is skills fire an additional projectile. If you're a bow build, you're in love with this and you're absolutely taking it because it's something like 15-20% multiplicative damage to get an additional projectile with no penalty. This means you don't have to use things like LMP or GMP. Obviously, the exact value, 15-20% more, that depends on your bow. That depends on your other projectiles. You might have 3, you might have 5, you might have permanent Dying Sun for 8. But regardless, there's some value there, and it could be quite high. So this is very good, and I'd bet is one of the most expensive on this list. Then Rango Karai is pretty bad. 8% chance to defend with 200 armor. That's just so inconsistent that no one's really going to take it. I suppose with more chance to defend with percent armor effects, eventually we'll get to 200% armor all the time, 100% chance to defend. But until you can get that, I don't really see the value here. Cooldown recovery rate on Salio, that's a bit of a weird one. A lot of the builds that are cast on crit these days aren't actually up at the top of a tree. They're going more towards the right side of a tree now. But I think you do go close enough to the witch for power charge stacking that it could still be useful. In some cases, this is insane, and in other cases, this is useless. Whether you take this or not entirely depends on if it gets you over another cooldown breakpoint where you can increase your attack speed. If it does, good. And if it doesn't, it's useless and you shouldn't waste the points on it. Tafoa gives 8% increased effective flasks on you, and not just magic utility flasks. So if you want to get that +1 projectile from Dying Sun for a total of 3, this is a way to do it. Again, though, you can't stack too many of them because there's only a couple places in the tree that actually support this with the notables around it. Well, mix of notables and other small passives. It's any passive skills, so notable, small passive, keystone, mix and match them, get what you want. And that also makes it tricky because sometimes there's a notable that's really, really awkward in what would have otherwise been a really good spot. I believe acrobatics is one example of that just completely ruins it. Next up, Tukohama, life regeneration rate, probably not worth the investment. 16%'s not that insane. That's a suffix on gear, and I would not give up 7 passives for a suffix on gear. And +1 max lightning res, which again has the problem of being lightning res, but overall isn't terrible. So now let's just look through the list, and I'll skip the ones I've already talked about, try to go through and give my thoughts on the more regular tattoos. One thing to note, the honored tattoos that say replace a small attribute passive skill, those are associated with Hinakora. You get them for winning the tournament, which makes them rarer and in a lot of cases more powerful, whereas the regular tattoos associated with the tribe you get through gameplay, making them more common and also in a lot of cases less powerful, though there are some exceptions that I will point out. So this is a good way to cap chaos res. Non-curse auras from your skills. Aura bots want to know your location. If you don't need more attributes on your aura bot, you should absolutely stack these up. Mana reservation, very good. If you can use these to fit in another aura, absolutely worth it. They're probably quite expensive though. 2% increased max life. I've gotten a couple of these. They seem fairly common, and it's great to have extra life, especially on a build like mine, which isn't in the best spot. Tree-wise, I have to kind of go like this to get life, so this saves me quite a bit of pathing. Or maybe turns that pathing into useful life. Rarity of items found for people who really want to find the magic. Res, I mean, if you need it, you need it. If you don't, you don't. I'd take attributes over res in a lot of cases. This one's interesting because it turns 10 points of a single attribute into 12 total points across all 3. 10 dex becomes 4 dex, 4 strength, 4 int. Those are really cool because sometimes you're just slightly short on attribute requirements and you can quickly shift your attributes around. I like that. Not necessarily the most powerful, but very useful. And who knows, maybe there's a tri-attribute stacker that Captain Lynch is going to make, which absolutely abuses them. Turtle, 3% increased global defenses. Global defenses are armor, evasion, energy shield, and ward. For any build that's stacking defenses, if you know how powerful Skin of a Loyal, Skin of a Lord is, then you know how powerful this is. It's pretty good. Not necessarily perfect because it does require an attribute node to be given up and some damage, etc. However, if you're a word loop build and you want more ward, this is a great way to get it, and ward doesn't have any attributes associated with it, except a lot of ward builds use crystallized omniscience, so you'd need a non-omni ward build to make that truly work. Loyalty tattoos seem to be a little bit rarer, and they summon different spirits that give you bonuses. I'm still not sure what all of these do, and if they're really cool, I'll probably make a future video dedicated to the loyalty tattoos. In short, loyalty tattoos are neat, but very niche, and you can only get one of each. So there's nothing too impressive about do you use it or not. Well, if it's good, you use it. Like if you don't have suppress, you're definitely not using a loyalty tattoo here. That said, if you do want to see an in-depth dive on the loyalty tattoos, let me know down in the comments below. Be sure to get subscribed and maybe leave a like while you're down there. Then we've got cold res. If you need cold res, or if there's an effect that, say, encourages you to stack cold res, pretty good. Chance to avoid being chilled and frozen. There's so many ways to avoid being frozen that this doesn't seem very good. Effective Herald buffs, if you're using, say, Herald of Ash plus Herald of Purity, not bad at all. Killing blows have a chance to shatter. This is corpse destruction. Flat cold damage. This is a tough one because it's very, very build specific. In some cases, it's very powerful to get 3 to 5 cold damage. In other cases, it's not very good. If your build has a lot of increases to damage, multipliers, this is powerful. And there are others for fire damage, lightning damage, physical damage, and even chaos damage. But if you don't have very many multipliers, it's better to have a damage increase than base damage. Reduced effect of curses. If you're up in the top of a tree, you want to not be cursed. This is a pretty decent way to get pseudo or full curse immunity. Generates 3 mana per second. I don't think this is super useful to most builds, but getting a couple of these instead of intelligence can definitely help you sustain mana and use your skills more efficiently. Skill effect duration, again, very, very niche. Most builds won't really scale off of skill effect duration. It's nice to have, but you'll usually want it as part of something else. And intelligence reduces your total mana, and it also reduces your energy shield, so it's not always the best thing to give up. Minions have increased life. Do you turn minion life into some sort of explosion? If so, stack these. If not, probably don't. Recharge rate, I don't think this is that good personally. 10% is kind of a lot, but recharge builds are just worse than instant leech, at least most of the time. For those niche recharge builds, though, and for some sort of niche thing that possibly converts ES recharge into life recharge, could be pretty powerful, especially in the case of life recharge where you don't need the intelligence anymore. This one, the Katava Blood Drinker, is great. This is one of the strongest basic tattoos because it's a one-hit wonder. You place one strength node and congratulations, you have attack damage leeched as life. It works on elemental, works on chaos, don't have to get leech anymore. It's great. Killing blows have a chance to consume corpses. Again, if you need recovery for life, probably just go life on kill here. If you get some specific bonus from consuming corpses, like a Corpse Pact Necromancer, that's when you'd use this, but it requires killing blows, so it's not great. Makes Devour support look real bad, though. Chance to avoid bleeding. There's other ways to solve bleeding. Life preservation efficiency at 4%. This one's pretty neat, provided you're not using arrogance support, but instead getting your blood magic through a Prism Guardian, because then you really, really get to stack that reduction up and run some pretty big auras. There's the fizz damage I mentioned. Of course, fire res, reduced ignite duration. All right. This is an interesting one. Namahu Warmonger. Enemies you kill have a chance to explode. Explode is good. Explode accelerates your clear, and there's more ways to get it than ever. Just convert 4 or 5 strength nodes and you'll start to notice the pops. Convert a few more and you probably don't even need an Oriath's End, because it doesn't take that much. Even a 10-15% explode is very noticeable when clearing, doubly so when you have poison or ignite to additionally inflict dots, spread further, etc., etc. Woodcarver, if you're scaling totem life with, say, sacrifice or flame wood, it works. Otherwise it doesn't. Accuracy stackers, although I don't know how much dex they have. Movement speed, gotta go fast. I think a lot of bow builds will enjoy this. Evasion's kind of meh. Then we've got suppress. This one's really cool because it's 10 dexterity becomes 2% suppress. Magebane, which is quite popular, gives you 1% per 15 dexterity. So this is quite a lot more efficient, but you lose the dexterity, whereas with Magebane you just gain in addition. I actually think this means there's more reason than ever to drop Magebane and instead invest into quite a few of these, converting unneeded dexterity on builds that don't benefit from accuracy and already have enough evasion. I don't think these are particularly useful. I guess guard skill duration's okay, but I wouldn't give up strength for it. Reduced extra damage from crits. If you are using this to cap, let's say you had 80% before, 50% from chest, 30% from a node on the tree, put in 2 of these, really good. If you're giving up 100 intelligence for it, only if your build really doesn't scale off of int. Then replaces a strength passive for armor. If you're an armor stacker or otherwise need armor more than life, this could be worth it, but there is that trade-off there. Increased effect of your marks. This is going to be a lot of damage, especially on builds that don't have any other sources of mark effect, so not Deadeyes. Kind of depends. Overall, I'd rate this as a quite powerful one, though, and it's likely to be pretty cost efficient, though we'll see that in just a little bit. Flask effect duration, that one's really good. 2 or 3 of these can immediately replace one of the modifiers on your belt. If you get something like Flask Charges, that opens up a belt slot to, say, Craft for Shock Avoid to use with Storm Shroud, which is a very powerful option, especially on Pathfinder. A little bit less on other builds, though Flask Duration still isn't bad. Just again, use with caution, it takes up the same spot as accuracy because you get accuracy and evasion from your dexterity. Damage taken recouped 2%. At 2%, I think I'd honestly rather get it elsewhere in most cases because a lot of builds benefit from Energy Shield. But let's say I'm a Divine Flesh build up at the top of a tree. I'm reserving all my mana, so that doesn't matter, and I don't benefit from Energy Shield. Then we're talking, I'll replace Int with all of these, and it'll be beautiful. That gives you an insane amount of recovery. It's not that the effect is bad, it's just the node it replaces is also useful to a lot of builds in that position. Warcry cooldown. This one's probably mandatory if you're playing a new Corrupting Cry build. At the very least, Warcry cooldown is very good for those builds, and you probably want quite a bit of it. Melee strike range also feels really good. You can get it on Cyclone, any strike skill, you name it. Now, if you're attacking a lot, you can also get melee hits which stun have a 5% chance to fortify. You will be stunning most monsters and occasionally stunning bosses. This won't be the best for bossing, but while mapping should be a pretty good source of fortify, just don't roll stun immune maps. I'd use it on things like Bone Shatter that want to stun anyway and want to already avoid stun immune to avoid adding another weakness or Achilles heel to your build. As a note, you cannot use this with Storm Shroud. This says reduced effect. Storm Shroud needs chance to avoid. Then we've got block ones and the lightning res and lightning damage. So now let's go over to PoE Ninja and take a look at some of the prices here. So here we have PoE Ninja for Trial of the Ancestors and all the tattoos. As you can see, +1 max frenzy charges, 19 divines, very low levels of listings. I think this is actually overpriced for what it is. If anything, I expect Honor Tattoo of a Storm will eclipse it. But again, there's so few listings that these prices are incredibly volatile. We've got additional projectile. That's expensive, like I expected. Any charge stacking, pretty expensive. Onslaught. These are all so rare that they're going to be expensive. Like, look at this. 10, 5, 5. PoE Ninja barely has the data. Whereas to get a good sample size of a stable price, you really want to see 100 or so listed. I'd trust something like this pretty well. That, yeah, 1% reservation is good. 20 chaos seems fair. There's 500 listings. I expect that to rise as more people find ways to fit extra auras into their build using this. We've also got the attribute one, pretty useful. Flock, non-curse auras. Is there anything in here that I wouldn't expect to see? Something that's not a Makanga? Nope, nothing. These are all very rare. Oh, wait. Wow. Remember how I said this was bad? Yeah, all the others are worth divines. This one's worth 45C. Some other fairly common tattoos to keep in mind. Herbalist, Flask Effect Duration, 10C each. Pathfinders love it. We've got Explodey. That one's probably going to go up. People generally love their Explodey. And Warcry cooldown, like I said, people are playing Corrupting Cry. Chaos Res makes sense. Loyalty Tattoo, first one I've seen actually, so this one's probably pretty good if people are buying it. Not many people are using it though, you can see that just based on the price. Suppress, yep, Suppress makes sense. Got another movement speed. Those are all things that I would expect to see, and I also expect some of the prices to trend up over time, others to trend down. Like the Frenzy Charge stacking is probably going to go below power long term. And I wouldn't be surprised if, let's just see, something like this, the regenerate 3 mana per second, falls out of favor as more people get their build into a spot where they don't really need mana fixing. 1 or 2 of these is nice, but you're not going to need a ton of them, whereas someone's going to make a move speed build where they just literally wear 30 of these. I don't know who, but someone's going to do it. And those are some of my thoughts on the new tattoos, which ones will be useful, what builds they might be good for, and where we can see prices going in the future. Though no one can know the future. Least of all me when it comes to predicting trends in Path of Exile, because there's some crazy stuff that comes out of nowhere. Could be that a build tomorrow ends up using a ton of tattoos that no one was talking or thinking about, and it's so overpowered that all of a sudden the price of those spikes and they're going for a divine each. But I'd keep this PoE Ninja page up. Remember, the PoE Ninja aggregation data isn't always the best. People can cheese it with fake listings, that sort of thing. Look in-game, especially if something's low confidence, like Honor Tattoo of a Storm. But in general, this is a good way to get a really rough idea, both of what the tattoos do and how much they're worth. If you want a very quick TLDR of what to take that is worth money, number 1, notable tattoos. They're probably going to be worth more than anything else. Number 2, Makanga tattoos. Number 3, honor tattoos in general. Number 4, the specific things that I've mentioned, like a tattoo of the Ramako Shaman for spell suppression, or a tattoo of the Tafoa Herbalist for flask effect duration. But I'm curious, which tattoos have you been using in your builds and why? Be sure to let me know down in the comments below. Now, if you're looking for something else to watch, there's going to be a recommendation on screen right now. If you want my thoughts on Trial of the Ancestors, I just made a beginner's guide. Or if you're more of a money-savvy exile, I recently talked about how I farmed my basic seed money, and I'm going to be doing a more advanced strategy, both on a live stream that's coming out later today. Be sure to get subscribed and leave a like while you're down there if that interests you at all. If you need a guide, then head over to MaxwellGG. And with that said, before I go, a special thanks to my patrons and channel members for continued support. For as low as $1 a month, you can help make videos just like this one possible, and link to that is down in the description. But with that said, thanks for watching, I hope you've enjoyed, maybe you learned something today, and I'll see you again sometime soon.